Fascism, as a distinct political ideology, is primarily associated with the early 20th century, particularly in Italy and Germany. But the roots and elements that would contribute to its development can indeed be traced back further in history. Here's a look at some influences, precursors, and aspects of earlier movements and ideologies that laid the groundwork for fascism. Pre-20th century influences on fascism. Nationalism. Nationalism, characterized by a strong identification with one's nation, was already a significant force in Europe in the 19th century. Romantic nationalism emerged in various countries, emphasizing cultural unity and national sovereignty. Figures like Giuseppe Mazzini in Italy promoted nationalist sentiments that would later resonate with fascist ideology. Authoritarianism. Several authoritarian regimes in the 19th century can be seen as precursors to fascism. For example, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte established an authoritarian regime in France after the coup of 1851. His regime combined elements of populism and nationalism. The French Revolution, 1789, while often viewed through the lens of liberalism and democracy, the reaction to the French Revolution in the form of conservative backlash influenced the development of authoritarian ideologies. The rise of strong nationalist sentiments and the notion of the people had a lasting impact on political thought. Social Darwinism and militarism. The late 19th century saw the rise of social Darwinism, an ideology that applied Darwinian concepts of natural selection to societies and nations, suggesting that stronger nations had the right to dominate weaker ones. This line of thought contributed to the militaristic and imperialistic tendencies that would be embraced by fascist movements. Liberalism versus control. The backlash against liberal ideas, particularly during economic crises and social upheaval, fueled a desire among certain segments of society for strong leadership. The perceived chaos stemming from political liberalism contributed to a demand for authoritarian solutions. Political movements. Some political movements and groups in the late 19th and early 20th centuries displayed early fascist tendencies. For instance, the National Socialist Workers' Party in Germany, formed in the early 20th century, had its roots in earlier nationalist and socialist movements, blending elements that would later be co-opted into fascist ideology. Dadaism and Futurism. The artistic movements that arose around the First World War, such as Futurism, championed aggression, violence, and the glorification of war, which echoed the militaristic aspect of fascism. Figures like Filippo Tommaso Marinetti glorified the ideals that would later be associated with fascist movements in Italy. Italian nationalism and racism. Some pre-fascist Italian nationalist groups, such as the Italo-German Entente, promoted militaristic and expansionist ideologies, emphasizing a strong national identity, which laid the groundwork for Mussolini's fascism. While fascism as a formal and recognized ideology emerged in the early 20th century, the strands of thought and political ideology that contributed to its development can be traced back to earlier historical contexts. Ideologies of nationalism, authoritarianism, social Darwinism, and militarism all played a role in shaping the environment in which fascism arose. Moreover, societal responses to crises such as economic instability and political turmoil provided fertile ground for the acceptance of fascist ideologies in post-World War I Europe. Understanding these precursors can help clarify how fascism emerged as a dominant force in the 20th century and why it resonated with certain populations during that period. The rise of fascism, an in-depth exploration. Welcome to our deep dive into the rise of fascism, a political ideology that emerged in the early 20th century and significantly shaped the course of history in Europe and beyond. Characterized by authoritarianism nationalism, and a rejection of liberal democracy and socialism, fascism brought about profound changes in governance and society. Join us as we explore the origins of fascism, its ideological foundations, key figures, major movements, and the legacy it left on history. Historical context and origins. Fascism emerged in a tumultuous period marked by the aftermath of World War I, social unrest and economic instability. Several key factors contributed to the rise of fascism: World War I and its aftermath. The Great War, 1914-1918, caused widespread devastation, loss of life, and economic dislocation. Many veterans returned home disillusioned, fueling radical political movements, economic turmoil. The post-war period witnessed economic crises including hyperinflation and high unemployment, particularly in countries like Germany and Italy. This created a fertile ground for extremist ideologies. Political instability. Many European nations struggled with political fragmentation and unstable governments following the war. In Italy, for instance, the liberal government was seen as ineffective, leading to widespread disillusionment with democracy. Fear of communism. The Russian Revolution of 1917 and the subsequent rise of communism heightened fears among the middle and upper classes. Fascists capitalized on this fear, positioning themselves as a bulwark against communist revolutions. Ideological foundations of fascism. Fascism is characterized by several key ideological principles. Nationalism. At its core, fascism emphasizes extreme nationalism. The state is considered paramount, often at the expense of individual rights. Fascists advocate for a unified, homogeneous national identity. Authoritarianism. Fascist regimes reject democratic governance, favoring instead strong, centralized, and often dictatorial control. The leader is often seen as a charismatic figure who embodies the will of the nation. Militarism. Fascism glorifies military power and the use of violence as a means to achieve political goals. This is reflected in the emphasis on discipline, duty, and readiness for war. Anti-communism and anti-liberalism. Fascists vehemently oppose socialist movements and liberal democracy, viewing them as threats to national unity and stability. They often employ propaganda to discredit leftist ideologies, social Darwinism and corporatism. Fascists often draw on concepts from social Darwinism, contending that social hierarchies are natural and beneficial. Corporatism, or the alignment of corporate and state interests, is seen as a means of organizing society and economy. Key figures and movements. Fascism found expression in several key figures and movements across Europe: Benito Mussolini and Italian fascism. Mussolini founded the Italian Fascist Party in 1919 and rose to power in 1922, becoming Italy's prime minister. He emphasized nationalism and sought to restore Italy to its former glory, often using violence and intimidation against political opponents. Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. Hitler joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, in the early 1920s and became its leader by 1921. The Nazi Party exploited economic instability and nationalist sentiment to gain power, culminating in the appointment of Hitler as Chancellor in 1933. The regime's anti-Semitism, militarism, and aggressive expansionism became hallmarks of fascism on a 20th century scale. Francisco Franco in Spain. Franco led the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War 1936-1939, aided by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. After his victory, he established a fascist regime that lasted until his death in 1975. Other fascist movements. Smaller fascist movements emerged across Europe, including the British Union of Fascists led by Oswald Mosley and the Romanian Iron Guard. These groups often mirrored the styles and rhetoric of Mussolini and Hitler. Key events and rise to power. Several critical events marked the rise of fascism. The March on Rome, 1922. Mussolini's dramatic march to capital Rome exemplified the aggressive tactics used by fascists to gain power. The threat of violence and the support of large segments of the population led to King Victor Emmanuel III appointing Mussolini as Prime Minister. The Beer Hall Putsch, 1923. An early failed coup attempt by Hitler to seize power in Munich, which resulted in his arrest. During this time, he wrote Mein Kampf, outlining his ideology and plans for Germany. The Enabling Act, 1933. After the Reichstag fire, Hitler pushed through this law, allowing him to enact laws without the Reichstag's approval. It effectively marked the end of democracy in Germany and the establishment of a totalitarian regime. Expansionist policies and militarization. The fascist regimes pursued aggressive expansionist policies, such as Italy's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935 and Germany's annexation of Austria, Anschluss, in 1938, both of which reflected their imperial ambitions. Fascism and World War II. The rise of fascism significantly contributed to the outbreak of World War II. Alliances and Axis powers. Fascist regimes formed the Axis powers, including Germany, Italy, and Japan. They aimed to reshape the world order through war and conquest, conquests and atrocities. The invasions of Poland in 1939, followed by the fall of France in 1940, demonstrated the military efficiency of fascist regimes. Hitler's policies led to the systemic genocide of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust and millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. Resistance and opposition. Throughout the war, various resistance movements arose against fascist regimes. Groups across Europe engaged in sabotage, espionage, and armed struggle against the Nazis and Mussolini's forces. The fall of fascism. The defeat of fascism came with Allied victory in World War II, D-Day, and liberation of Europe. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944 marked a significant turning point, leading to the liberation of occupied territories and the eventual collapse of Nazi Germany in 1945. Mussolini's downfall. Mussolini was captured and executed by Italian partisans in April 1945, marking the end of fascist rule in Italy. Nuremberg trials. Following the war, leading figures of the Nazi regime were tried for war crimes, establishing a precedent for prosecuting crimes against humanity and providing a historical reckoning for the atrocities committed under fascist regimes. The legacy of fascism. The rise and fall of fascism had profound implications for the world. Post-war reconstruction. The aftermath of World War II saw significant political and social restructuring. In Europe, democratic governments were established in Germany and Italy, often with safeguards against the rise of totalitarianism. Cold War context. The ideological battle between communism and capitalism during the Cold War often overshadowed the lessons learned from fascism, yet it highlighted the importance of protecting democratic values. Contemporary resurgence. In the 21st century, concerns about the resurgence of far-right movements and authoritarianism evoke parallels with historical fascism. Discussions about nationalism, scapegoating, and civil rights are ongoing, prompting reflection on how societies confront these issues. Cultural impact. The legacy of fascism persists in art, literature, and media, stimulating discussions about morality, the nature of evil, and the conditions that allow authoritarian regimes to rise. In conclusion, the rise of fascism represents a critical chapter in modern history, marked by political extremism, social upheaval, and the struggle for human rights. Understanding the conditions that fostered fascism, its ideological underpinnings, and the consequences of its rise allows us to recognize and confront similar ideologies in contemporary society. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the rise of fascism. We hope you gained deeper insights into this crucial historical phenomenon. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Until next time.